Bob, as I understand it, you were one of the first people to ever go into combat with a military dog. Is that true?
That's right. In World War II, anyway. There was dogs in World War I, too, and dogs in Nicaragua in the Marine Corps before that.
What exactly did this dog do with you or for you?
We mostly went out. Of course, we didn't have any idea of what we were doing, actually. It was all hit or miss. And we went in for point dogs, which we trained also for attack, and found out later that was a mistake. We had Red Cross dogs, and we had messenger dogs, and we had what we called mine dogs. Later on, as the war went on, we pretty much cut down to messenger dogs and scout dogs. The others didn't work out that well.
Now, what would a scout dog do?
Well, a scout dog actually worked point. We worked point every day for various organizations. We were with the 2nd Raider Battalion, but they would rent us out when they were in the rear area. We would go out with the Army or the paratroopers or the Marine Corps, different Marine Corps units. And we always worked point. Whenever a patrol went out, the dog and his handler were always in the front. And if anything happened, the dog hopefully alerted and everybody was saved. If he didn't, the handler was in a hell of a mess.
Did you find yourself in a hell of a mess on occasion?
Several times. Fortunately, I had a very good dog, and we got pinned down a couple of times, but fortunately nobody ever got hurt.
What breed was he?
Doberman.
You remember his name after all these years?
Oh, yeah. Dog by the name of Liney. He was bred by Mr. Fleischman up in Baltimore. Yep.
Well, tell me this then. When you walk into a ring full of Doberman pinchers today, are you thinking of that dog?
I do at times. Mainly I think about it in the respect as the way the breed has changed over the years. I mean, he was an entirely different type dog than we see shown today. There was no similarity at all, particularly, except he was black and tan, and he did look like a Doberman.
And that's what? Was he bigger, bulkier?
Heavier made, yeah. Heavier boned, heavier bodied, heavier headed. Of course, the ear crops weren't quite as good as they are today, weren't as pretty. But he was much more of a working type dog, more of a German type, I guess you would say.
Would that be your preference if you had the two together?
If I were working the same kind of conditions in combat, I would take the old dog.
You think maybe the breed has gone astray over the years?
No, I think the breed has improved, at least to the American way of thinking. We go in for a great deal of elegance in most of our breeds and beauty, where some of the other countries, such as Germany, has still retained the heavier-made Boxer, the heavier-made Doberman. No, I don't think they've gone astray. I think they've improved a great deal.
Is judging as much fun as you thought it would be?
Oh, yeah, I enjoy judging. I think it's great. I have difficulties at times because I do lose my concentration if I have a lot of classes in which I think dogs are poor class dogs, dogs that really shouldn't be shown, in my opinion. And I lose my concentration, and I don't think it really makes any difference to anybody. With whatever way I place them, I'm right, and whichever way I place them, I'm wrong. I mean, there's no win situation. And when I lose my concentration, it becomes a matter of passing out ribbons, and I don't really like to do that.
Well, you're talking now when you have a class full of mediocre animals.
That's right. That's right. It's when you have a great class with good dogs in it, this is thrilling and this is exciting. A class of mediocre dogs or poor dogs, you just lose interest. At least I do. I lose interest completely.
You have trouble with holding ribbons in some of those cases?
No, I don't have trouble with holding ribbons, but I do have trouble hurting people's feelings. That bothers me a great deal, and I will let people I will pass out ribbons to some people, and usually I have a little chat with them and say, please don't show this dog anymore. He's really not that quality. Now, whether they heed me or not, I don't know.
Well, I'm very familiar with an occasion recently when Judge withheld a ribbon on a dog one day, and the next day, under a different judge, it goes winners.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. I've seen that happen before. In fact, I've done it myself. I've withheld ribbons where dogs have needed 1 point to finish or whatever. But that's a personal opinion, and I don't say that I'm right, but I don't know that I'm wrong either.
Well, that's kind of the problem with judging. It's not a cut and dried thing where 2 plus 2 is 4. In judging, it's so subjective.
Yes, well, and it should be. I think that through the years, upon occasion, we've tried to clone judges, which I think is definitely wrong. I think that everybody is entitled to his opinion. But I honestly believe that in a class of dogs, any decent or good judge is going to be in the ballpark. He's going to have those first 5 dogs up there. Now, if he has those 5 dogs at the end of the line and 5 dogs ahead of them, now he's a bad judge. But he's entitled to his opinion, and I don't think he's wrong if he puts my dog 2nd, 3rd, or 4th in a good class. I mean, that's fine. But he should be in that ballpark. He or she, that is.
Well, what about your handling days? Tell me about some of the great dogs you handled over the years.
Oh, handling was a lot of fun. I loved the competition, and I enjoyed it greatly. And I had a lot of great dogs. I was very fortunate in Whippets, and I was very fortunate in Old English. I was very fortunate in a great many breeds, boxers and so forth. And I call it fortunate that I was lucky enough to get a chance to show these dogs. And one thing leads to another. If you have one good dog, it's going to lead to another good dog. It always happens. Not that I was such a great handler myself. I think basically I was pretty much a journeyman. But I did know my work, and I think I did it quite well. But the thrill of handling, I think, is the greatest thrill in the business.
Was Westminster with the Whippet? That must have been your biggest win.
Yeah, Courtney Fleetfoot, I think, was probably the biggest winner. He won the biggest shows. In fact, he's the only one that ever won the Garden, Chicago, and Harbor Cities. Well, he established that record, and it probably would have been broken, but Harbor Cities went out of business, so nobody could ever repeat that one.
The best dogs you ever handled, is that a fair question? Can you pick, if you had to pick 1 or 2, is what you thought was pound for pound the best dog you ever handled, what would they be?
Oh, I think Courtney Fleetfoot probably was the best dog that I ever had my hands on, according to the standard. I think he had everything going for him, and you've got to realize the dog was only shown just about a year and 6 months, and he was only shown 6 months out of the year. And he had, I think, a record of like 30-some-odd breeds in 20-some-odd groups, and I don't know how many best in shows. It was quite a few, but we didn't keep records in those days on best in shows. But he was only beaten in the breed once that he was ever shown.
Why was his career so short?
Well, at that time, of course, we didn't have as many shows, and Peggy didn't like to show him in the summer because it was too hot. And so that was out, so that left us pretty much the winter, and he didn't go to Florida or anything like that, which left January out because there was no shows in the East Coast at that point. But he was shown pretty much down the line and at the shows that we attended at that time. And regardless of who was judging, the dog was shown. In fact, the only person that ever beat him was Mrs. Judith Shearer years ago, who was a great Whippet breeder. And I knew she didn't like the dog. And Peggy Newcomb said, well, we shouldn't show her. I said, well, you know, that's a great breeder. She's done a lot for the breed, and I think she should have her hands on the dog. So she had her hands on the dog, and she beat him. And she came back to me, and she said, Bob, why did you show him? You knew I wouldn't like him. I said, yes, ma'am, I did, Miss Shearer. But I said, you've also got to realize I never have to show him under you again. So that was the end of that conversation. But she was a wonderful lady. I always thought a great deal of her.
What about the Old English? Who was that? Andy? Who? Raggedy?
Yeah, there was Raggedy Andy, there was Prince Andrew, and there was Ceiling Zero. Ceiling Zero, I think, was probably the best of the three, although I think Prince Andrew ran him a great second. He wasn't as big a dog as Ceiling Zero. Ceiling Zero, if you wanted to fault him, he was a little more dog than he should have been. But he was a great dog. He was sound. He had a great temperament and a beautiful coat. He had everything going. Prince Andrew was a smaller dog, but he had the same attributes and a great, great temperament. both of them had fabulous temperaments.
Is it fair to compare dogs of those days with dogs of today?
I think, yes, in some breeds that it's definitely fair. A lot of the breeds have changed over the years. I don't think Old English in particular are as good as they were back then. I think some of the greyhounds that I showed, Magic and Mortimer that won the Group of the Garden 3 years in a row, could come out today and compete in greyhounds with no problem. I think some of your whippets of the past could come out today and win. Not only hold their own, but win in the competition. Some of your other breeds have changed so drastically that no. Standard poodles, for instance. We used to show standard poodles that were great bodies, great big depth, beautiful depth of body and so forth. Their heads were a little bit different than they are today. We've elongated the head. We've narrowed up the back skull. Not necessarily the best, in my opinion.
When you're judging, what catches your eye first, breed type or movement?
I think breed type and outline, the picture of the overall outline is what gets me first. Then I look for breed type, and of course I look for movement. And I think some movement is more important in some breeds than others. But I still think you have to have a certain amount of type there too.
I just enjoy getting caught up in the conversation sometime because so many people seem to blatantly prefer, or rather emphasize one over the other, when in fact we need it all.
We're looking for it all, and I think it's more importance right at this point should be placed on movement because we have lost it in some breeds drastically.
Really? Like what?
Well, I'm not going to get down into any certain breeds. I'm not too bright, but I'm not that dumb either.
I tried.
But I think that people have got to look, particularly in some of these working breeds and some of these sporting breeds, they've got to look at movement because without movement, you don't have anything that can go out there and work. And I still think you have to have a certain amount of respect for what the dog has been bred for. And I think you have to work with that to a degree. I think we've improved a lot of the breeds, and except for that one factor. And I think we're losing it very rapidly. There are some breeds that I think, I don't see why we even bother to move them. They're just so bad. And it's sad, but in my opinion, it's true.
We don't have the skilled breeders of the old days, do we? People put dogs together and make puppies, but the skill isn't there like it was.
Well, the game has changed drastically, as you know, Rick. You've been around long enough. People can't afford these big kennels anymore, and they can't afford the number of brood bitches and dogs that we had. I think there's some good breeders around today, and I think they're doing a fine job. But I think that we're dealing more with numbers now, and I think it seems worse to us sometimes than it really is. I go back to the days of run 300 and 400 dog shows where they were norm. This was the way it was. Now we're talking 1,500 is a small show. So you're seeing the numbers increase, and I don't think the number of good dogs have increased that much. I think they're still there, but now they're being overshadowed by the number of dogs, which of course is developing pure quality in some cases, in our opinion.
So the percentage of good dogs is lower than ever.
No, I don't think the percentage of good dogs is lower. I think it's just that we're all caught up in this numbers game, that we see so many dogs. The good ones are still there. I don't think that I've ever gone to a best in show that I can think of that I haven't seen a good best in show. There's 7 pretty good dogs in there. Once in a while you'll have one that's not too hot, or maybe 2, but the others are really top dogs. So that's got to say something.
Which brings up an interesting point. When you're judging best in show and you have 7 dogs from 7 different groups, isn't it awfully hard to select just one for best in show because they're all so different. It's not like picking the best Doberman out of a bunch.